All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for getting into logged in for this webinar, day 3 of our emergency response program. Um, as usual, we want to say thank you to our sponsors and partners. Well, it's not changing the slides again. Thank you. We want to say thank you to our sponsors, IEDC and Indiana Economic Development Corporation. Thank you for being such a wonderful partner and helping us put together this program. Gutwein Law, M Accounting, and the Weber Company, thank you all for supporting as well. We wouldn't be able to do it without you guys. So as always, we will be using the Q&A box to answer questions throughout this presentation. So you can type in your question in the Q&A box and that will get sent to us and we will do our best to answer those questions. Any unanswered questions will be sent to the speaker and we will do our best to answer those questions one-on-one. Please do not send your questions in anonymously so that we can make sure that we have a way to get back to you. If you are having trouble with the Q&A feature on Zoom, you can also email your questions directly to Cole@gener8tor.com during the webinar, and he will do his best to answer those questions as well. If you have any technology issues due to the number of people today on the webinar, unfortunately, we will not be able to help you with your tech issues. You are more than welcome to reach out to Zoom directly if you do have anything that you need help with. We will also be recording the webinar and share it with everybody after the webinar is over. So if you miss a part or if you are having any technical difficulties, you'll be able to listen to the recording of the webinar after it is over. Okay, so today we have Johnny Walker. He is a VP with my temp CFO, and he's going to be talking to everybody about alternative lending sources, cash flow planning, and payroll tax implications. So Johnny, you can go ahead and share your screen and take it away.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great, wonderful. Let me just get this up. And hopefully that's showing okay, is it?
Yes, it's loading. Hold on.
Great.
Yep, now it's working. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Chelsea. It's a pleasure to be here. I will actually just apologize for the background here, which you can see behind me. Is not virtual. This is my basement. But this is my new office, frankly, in the current situation. So, and I even asked if I could move upstairs, but my wife said, "I love you, but please stay in the basement." So here we are. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I am VP of Sales technically for Dinero company. Dinero has in its group M Accounting, Temp CFO, who I was originally with, Nomad Financial, and Account Keepers. So we're actually a conglomerate of various different companies with geography around the States. So I'll go into a little bit more of a description on us, but it's great to be here talking to you guys and representing M Accounting and the sponsor here for the program. So just as a little bit more background, this is the family of the companies. As I've mentioned, Temp CFO is West Coast based. We also have an office on the East Coast. M Accounting, that you know well, based in Indianapolis, and a very strong presence across the Midwest area. Account Keepers is North Carolina, a very, very specific office down there targeting that sector of companies and technology-backed ventures. And then Nomad Financial is based in New York, and a new entrant into the Dinero family. So a little bit just showing you where our offices are around the country. And I think the key thing here is that from an accounting standpoint and tax, our services are essentially remote, provided remote. But CFO is one of the key elements of our service platform, is that we need to provide CFO support to our clients. And that's almost always done face-to-face, or at least with the opportunity for face-to-face. So this is one of the important reasons why we have this spread of offices around the country. It's a particularly crucial part of our model in getting access for you to resource that you can interact with directly on the CFO front. Just a few clients, some of these names you should probably will know. A couple at the top right there, just a bit more relevant to the Indianapolis sector that Accounting's worked with, and the other companies in Dinero have worked with over the course of recent years. So it just gives you a flavor for the kind of companies that we've supported, and some of them we joined, or they joined us rather, at a very early stage. And then we help them scale up through growth, and that really is what we focus on, is making sure that you've got the accounting and finance management processes that can be cost efficient at the early stage, and then grow with you and scale through to exit or IPO on the platform that we provide. So that's just a view on some of our recent clients. Okay, so today I'm going to cover critical topics that are relevant right now on planning and business management. And I know that the current context, the current economic environment, there's a lot of focus on the COVID fundraising initiatives that are coming out of the government. I'm by no means an expert on those. We actually have a team internally in Dinero that is focused solely on that government legislation. And we are actually, I'm going to mention this at various points today, we are holding a webinar later this afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and that will be specifically on those financing initiatives. So that will talk you through what the requirements for the loans are, how to apply for the loans. We'll have some banking resources that will be on the webinar as well. And then we'll also have our Senior Tax Director, Doug Carpenter, talking through various of the tax initiatives that you can take advantage of. So those are really, really important. And it's also important that you listen to somebody who knows what they're talking about in that. So I'm not going to cover it. I'm going to cover some more of just the business and the planning aspects here. So that's a list of topics. Focus on cash, just some of the steps that you can take immediately in thinking about managing cash. Some of the other ways you might manage based upon a decision framework for contingency going on. And then staffing, it's a hard topic to cover. But I'll give you some overview of how you might think about the staffing approach there. Outsourcing, again, something that we know extremely well, because the format of our business is frankly one of outsourcing. So I can talk you through what's successful for a client-vendor relationship there. Something I'm going to harp on repeatedly throughout is the importance of communicating. And I'll use the term stakeholders, but that covers everything from employees through vendors through investors and customers. And then last, the fundraising. There's a general assumption that in periods like this, fundraising just stops. And I'm going to give you some perspective of why I think evidence shows that this is actually a particularly key time to keep investment conversations going. And last, slightly out of flow, but I just wanted to talk you through, show you an example of a cash flow forecasting model. And it's certainly one of the takeaways from the webinar today is the importance of putting one of those together. So if you've not seen one before, I'm going to just talk through the very, very basics of it. Okay. And we will have time for Q&A at the end. I think if anything does pop up in the course of it, I'm happy to be interrupted and I can answer a question, but there definitely will be Q&A time at the end. So just on the finance and the cash flow planning side. So cash now, given the disruption and the uncertainty of what the world is, or the economy is in, it's particularly important to, well, take immediate action. The words are there. A lot of what we see clients doing is just a hiring freeze. So your hiring was forecast based upon growth plans. One of the quickest ways that you can make sure that there's no unnecessary spend is just to put a complete freeze on hiring. Now there might be, and there will be instances where hiring is still important to service customers, existing customers or whatever. But one step to take right up front is just to say no more hiring until you've really figured out what the forecast looks like. Discretionary spending. I mean, even in the world now, given that we're all remote and travel is so restricted, I mean, you can look at the travel, entertainment, the meals budgets, all the kind of office support. That sort of thing is, frankly, there's no need to be spending on any of it at all right now. So some of that stuff is just by nature of how we're having to work is going to get cut. But you want to go through your P&L. You want to go through your financial statements and determine where is money going that is just unnecessary. And you will find a lot just by taking a first scan through. You will see things immediately that you can start to cut. that are non-core to the business. So it's one of the very first things that you should do to make sure that there's no more cash going out the door from tomorrow onwards that is unnecessary expenditure. I'm going to come back to the communicating topic. I'm making the point here because it is important to do it from the very first moment, but I'll come back to it in more detail. And then there is the staffing side, and I'm going to highlight some of the approaches. I'm going to really encourage that you talk to your legal teams as early as possible, right away, and then they will give guidance on some of the ways in which you can think about staffing cuts. So that topic is going to come up again. The other thing, again, I'll harp on about this as well. It is very easy to put a cash flow plan together, and that's something you should focus on right away. And I'll go through an example of it, but the cash inflows are easy to identify based upon your current financial or recent financials, and then cash outflows. There's one area that your accountant or financial advisor, if you have a temporary CFO or if you have an accountant, you're actually doing outsourced accounting already. These are particularly valuable resources for helping you put that together quickly. For a lot of our clients, our controllers are working with them, day by day, week by week. We have a strong degree of familiarity where the dynamics and the trends of the cash flows in the business actually are. So it's a very easy process for us to put one of these together. We have templates internally, and we can help get that cash flow plan up and available to you, so you can start to go through it and optimize it and make it more accurate. So these are the things that you can take steps on right now that make sure that you're not bleeding cash in unnecessary places. There are the relief programs, as I've mentioned before. I'm not going to cover those in detail here. The disaster loan program, the paycheck protection program, I believe that the legislation was finalized and everything was made available, went live today. This obviously is going to be subscribed very heavily. There's a huge degree of, it's very important to actually apply for that very quickly, because it is going to get used up. And then there are a boatload of other tax relief initiatives. So it's complex stuff. There are a lot of people out there, firms like us, who are advising clients and the public on how they can take advantage of it. Strongly recommend spending time listening to these, and because these experts have reviewed the legislation and have really brought it down into a consumable number of bullets and reading that you can do to understand what can I take advantage of right now and how can I do it. So again, our webinar is later today. We've got a team of people on it at 4 p.m. and that I really recommend listening to that. And then also, when it comes to it, we'll mention it again later today as well, for the loan application processes, we can help you on that. There are various steps that you can take with us that will help make sure that your loan application is a success. So those are the other very important from a cash flow standpoint, and why accessing these resources is very, very useful for you. On a contingency planning side here, so you've cut cash, you've cut bleeding rather, and so you've preserved cash. One of the things you need to figure next is, what are you going to do based upon how events unfold? And you need to come up with, because you're going to have a base plan, and then you're going to say, well, various things could happen in my business to which I need to react. And if you sit down and you go through the dynamics and you understand the customer base, the vendors, you will identify quite quickly what the 3 or 4 major events might be that would make you take a different course of action, or require you to do things very differently. And that might be that you have, perhaps you're got a very large customer that takes up quite a lot of the revenue, and you've got to decide what you would do if that customer cut back or removed their business from you. So those events are what drive your contingency plans, and you want to think through. You want to define those, and you want to think through what are the reactions that you would take as consequences of those events actually happening. And that isn't just going to be one; it's going to be about multiple things, and you want to try and architect those so that you know you can take action as and when they do arise. And that might be some of the non-essential spending cuts. It might be about looking at employees in different departments and identifying, well, if we did really, this happened, this is the set of people that we would cut or we would furlough. Think through what those different eventualities actually are. And one of the things that you can definitely do as soon as it's either necessary or immediate is a compensation reduction plan. That's something that is easily implementable. and definitely can really help in reducing that bleed on cash as well, with a requisite delivery of value back to employees after the period is over. So these are some of the steps you can take, but definitely a contingency plan with various phases in it that helps you understand what you would do if certain events actually happened is a particularly key part of the planning as well. On the staffing side, reduction in force, layoffs and furloughs, there's really, they fall into two categories. One is permanent, essentially permanent, and that you're saying goodbye to the staff. And obviously that comes with a severance package and typically some other services that you're offering them to help them at this particular time from an outplacement service standpoint. There are obviously these paycheck protection loans that are really the intent of the government is to prevent or to avoid companies having to go down this route. But sometimes steps like this are inevitable regardless of that. So it is an option and it's on the table and something that you can consider. Furloughs are temporary, essentially an unpaid leave from work for a specific period. So that's something that you could look to take advantage of if you determine that the event that would lead to more cash income is within a certain period, or you feel safe that you can commit to a temporary leave for various of the employees with the expectation that we return to work at a certain point. That doesn't actually restrict them, I believe, from finding another job in the interim. So those things always do come with some risk, but these are two ways in which you can think about managing the staff cost in the business. Last, on the cost point, the salary, the base compensation or base and commission, that's an easy cost to think about because you're going to stop paying somebody at some point and start paying them again, possibly from another point. The more complex part of it is benefits, because they're depending upon what strategy or you employ, the benefits, the legal requirement for benefits provision is different. And that's something where I say it at the bottom here, but I think you need to do it right at the start. Consult your legal team, because there are a lot of specifics around how you manage unemployment insurance, healthcare, all dental, vision, all that support that is benefits for employees right now. You need to figure out what the consequences are for either layoffs or furloughs and what cost implications there are for the business. And that's something that you definitely want to make sure that you're completely on the right side of the employment law. And so consult your legal team on that right away. But again, from a cost standpoint, base salary comp is usually the easy one to forecast. Benefits is the one that takes more work to understand what the implications of different decisions actually are. But these are the tough, difficult topics that do need to get covered at this kind of economic situation. Outsourcing. And this, I mean, so many businesses take advantage of outsourcing already because it is established in so many different ways. So if you can think about it, your lawyer is effectively an outsourced provider. Accounting has become very common as something that you can outsource because it is non-core essentially to the business until you become of scale and that you need to optimize internal processes more so that you're really eking out profitability. But at most early stages, outsourcing accounting is a very reasonable thing to do. What I would say is, in terms of analyzing your current business, you want to look through it and say, well, where is it I'm doing something internally right now that really could feasibly be done as by an outsourced provider? And you want to look at areas where there's an established business framework already for a particular type of service. I'm most familiar with the accounting one. Usually people have accounting and finance staff internally. It's a very, unfortunately for those staff, it's a very frequent area where cuts happen because business activity goes down, and there are various very robust ways in which you can get accounting handled as an outsourced service to your company. So some of it's going to be quite obvious. Some of it might not be quite so obvious, but I think a first criteria is to determine where do you feel there are established outsourced providers marketplace for something. And then in that, which those very specific disciplines are then non-core to your business. Figuring those out will give you the very easy 2 or 3 things that you could think about outsourcing right away. One of the remote versus on-site, outsourcing typically is synonymous with being remote. Of course, right now, most businesses are almost remote anyway, and that all the teams it's a shelter-in-place situation for something now and probably for the foreseeable future. So a lot of businesses are just having to figure out how they actually interact and work on a remote basis, which in some ways actually favors businesses to think about outsourcing because it's already established a mode of working where you are not relying upon on-site in-person interaction. But it is, from an outsource standpoint, the remote aspect is typically a contrast with what you are operating, even though that's different to this point in time. One of the and I advise this whenever we've got any clients that are or prospects that are looking to work with us. The really key enabler is making sure that there's a strong link of communication between the outsource provider and the company. That's really almost always dictates the success of an engagement for us. And so we always look to understand who's going to be that point of contact internally and what's that relationship like with that person. So we make sure that that's working effectively. And I'd say that in setting up any outsourced provider as a replacement to the way that you're currently doing things, make sure you understand very clearly how that communication is happening, who it's happening with, and make sure that they are very clearly responsible for that relationship with the outsource provider and to the success in making sure the outsource provider is provided all the information that they need in order to do the job that you're asking them to do. So that communication is absolutely fundamental. Another element in this, just the final one, is offshored. I'm mentioning that because a lot of providers won't be totally upfront with the fact that something is offshored. And we actually have part of our company is offshore. It's in the Philippines. But the way that we make that work is that we have very rigorous structures around how we utilize that resource to do very specific tasks. So there is no impact upon the timeliness of service to the client base. Like, we can figure out which tasks can get done. They're in a very different time zone, done reliably, and back into our controllers here. So then there's no perception on your side that there is actually an offshore facility that's been in the middle. But make sure that you understand the nature of the resource that you're bringing in as an outsourced service. That's particularly important, so you've got your expectations laid out. I always say with providers, get recommendations. If you're considering anything on the outsourcing front, make sure you get a friend, a partner, an investor to make a recommendation on outsourced providers. That's the best way to make sure you're getting something that's reliable. I put investors at the end there because sometimes investors have they've got a little bit of not conflict of interest, but there's definitely an interest on their part if they can recommend a vendor on the finance front, for example, because they'd like to have that route into finding information out in the company. But certainly from business partners and friends and their colleagues, you should be able to get good recommendations. I added in there for some of the contractor platforms, Upwork and Freelancer. I think there's a very small subset of activities that they're good for, design or preparing documents or other work like that. I think you want to be very careful how you use them. And there are definitely best practices on usage there that you can consider. But that's outsourcing is an extremely viable way to elicit savings for the company and yet keep operations and business going in a viable and ongoing fashion. Communications. I said I'd come back to this. Can't overemphasize how important it is to keep the stakeholders up to date with what's going on. Over the left-hand side there, be consistent. Transparency and trust is what you're trying to build. You've already got it most likely in the business, but you want to retain that. And the only way you're keeping that is if you're open with people and that you're consistent in how you're informing them of what's going on. And these 4 areas, I might pick on employees first, actually, because it is extremely important to keep them up to date and understanding of what difficulties the business is going through at a particular point in time. And again, honesty and direct communication to them is going to be most important in making sure that they understand and that they're still motivated, they see and they understand what's going on, and they'll be partners in the next stages of the business as it unfolds. On the customer side, one of the first things, frankly, that we did was we looked across the customer base and where do we think that we've got at-risk customers, who do we know most likely is going to be compromised because of financing limitations. You want to go through that and try and understand, and that's something that you would do, frankly, as part of that cash flow forecast, is you would look at where the customers are and who's most likely to start asking to defer payments on services. And building a relationship with them, communicating with them to say that you understand that they're going through as much difficulty as you are. By having that conversation, you can start to come up with some other ways in which you might be able to continue with that engagement and yet not either suffer the cash flow loss or at least figure out how to do deferrals from both the service standpoint, so you're reducing costs as well as keeping them on as a client and avoiding churn. So those kind of proactive and transparent relationships really help you. So keep them on your side, keep the customers on your side. Same thing goes for vendors. Communicate with all of them. You be consistent, so do what you say you're going to do. You'd be amazed at some vendors in this world now. People are very incentivized to help their customers, exactly like you are with your customers. The example I'd pick on is WeWork, or the example I'd highlight is WeWork. We've even got situations now where we're thinking about what to do with our WeWork facilities in New York and over on the West Coast. And WeWork is being very flexible. There are ways in which you can get 3 months. There are ways in which you can negotiate various things because you're not frankly using the office, and they need to keep you as a customer for the longer term. So they'll figure out how to help you in the short term. So you'll only learn that by communicating with the key representatives at each of the vendor firms, and that would go for all your vendors. I mean, and we're doing the same with we're a vendor obviously to various customers, and that's something that, you know, we're having those conversations because they're reaching out to us and they're asking how can we help them, how can we support them through this time with perhaps a cut down service platform that then keeps their financial information live and active, but doesn't, you know, imbue them with a bunch of costs that they really can't accept at this point in time. So there's lots of ways in which people can be flexible, and you'll only learn that by getting out there and communicating with them. Last one, not that there's any order of importance here other than employees. Last one then is the banker and financing partners. Bankers right now, with the amount of real-time changes that are happening in the financing industry, your banker is one of your strongest and closest relationships you want to keep. So give them all the information, be transparent with them, tell them how you're thinking about the business, tell them, share the cash flow situation with them, and they will help figure what initiatives and what financing options that they've got, what new products that they will be bringing to market can actually help you at this time. And again, things are moving so fluidly that really you're not sitting around waiting for stuff to turn up in an email with a discourse on how you might think about changing business in the future. You're only going to get to know these things by talking to them on the phone and getting in contact with them quickly. So pick up the phone, call them, and learn what's going on and how they can help. So again, communications overall, very, very important for all of your different stakeholders. Investment and fundraising. So I actually was saying earlier today that I was on a preparation call for another webinar just yesterday, and when the investors on it said that his words were, times like this is really when you see a lot of investors still very, very active. And so you look past it, prior recessions, a lot of the best investments were made at the point of deep, deep recession. So the investors that have capital are still going to be very active finding opportunities to invest. So the fundamental thing here is if you have, keep communicating as much as you can. Your existing investors, you need to keep them appraised of where things are at. That's one of the things I see our clients doing extremely well is what used to be monthly and often now is weekly updates to their investor set based upon KPIs, and they tell them what their cash flow forecast is at. They tell them what their plans are immediately and how they're keeping the employees motivated, how everybody's working, etc. Those updates are particularly important to maintain that investor trust and relationship that you have as a current investor. And then you may well at this point have been out there fundraising already for conversations to raise the next round of funding. Those existing conversations are likely to be the ones that you'll bring through, or most likely to be the ones that you bring through to actual close. I'm inferring there that trying to kick off a new conversation is definitely harder in this kind of context because it's very difficult to build that initial relationship. So look at the existing conversations you have and try hard as possible to keep those going and to keep them updated and see what the likelihood actually is of investment coming back from them. That said, what we are seeing, well, there's even a fund in New York right now that's moved its entire pitch for entrepreneurs pitching the fund for investment. They're moving that wholly online, so you can go and submit like your basic business, and they will if they select you, they'll put you into a cohort where they'll actually go through and allow you to pitch to the investors in that fund. So they've taken all that importance of being in person in order to get these conversations going. They're doing that completely online, and they're making it available. So you just have to go on to the funds that you know, perhaps you've identified already, see what they're doing and act or react to the way that they're asking for you to interact with them. So monitor what's going on. Angel groups are the same. There's a lot of capital there that can still be accessed. So look and see what they're doing in this world at this moment. And again, there's going to be lots of investors very active. People recognize the opportunity right now, and VC funds still they're on a timeline. They have to place funds. That's the way the whole fund structures get set up. And assuming that they don't fear default on their capital calls, they have access to capital and they'll be willing to place it for the right opportunities. I would say that implicit in this is obviously with a tougher market for both opportunities, and that it's an investor's opportunity set right now that has a consequent impact on valuation. So it's going to be a tougher place perhaps to negotiate hard, but there's still opportunities where you can raise a lot of interest out of investors and still be in a very strong position to argue and negotiate for the strongest valuation you possibly could. All that said, it's people talk about number of months to raise a round of funding, and this is the kind of amounts that people are going to be placing. I think it would be generally worth saying that it is not that those normal expectations that have applied for the last 4 or 5 years plus, don't rely on those being the way that the timing and the amounts are going to happen ongoing from here. So timing is going to be different. It's going to be erratic. Some are going to move quick. Some are going to move slow. Those assumptions around how long it's going to take probably aren't going to stick for the next few months at least. And so in that, keep a major focus on your cash management. Maintaining your cash is going to give you the greatest flexibility possible. Don't push yourselves in a position where you're having to negotiate in order to get funds in because you're about to run out. And that way you'll get completely compressed on the valuation side. So focus on the cash, and just know that it's investment money is out there. Keep at it. Just don't use those assumptions on how long it's going to take that have applied for the last 4 or 5 years. Things are going to be different for the next period on the fundraising side. Okay, just as we're coming up towards the end of the slides that I have, certainly I wanted to show you, if you've not seen cash flow projections before, this frankly is simple. It's a very simple tool. Doesn't need to be more than one sheet, maybe 2 if you've got a bunch of employees that you want to forecast separately, and then roll in a salaries line in the cash dispersed here. But frankly, this is the kind of format. It shouldn't be any more complex than this. And the key thing here is weekly. You know that if you're paying your payroll 24 periods of the course of the year, end of month and mid-month, or 26 periods of the course of the year because it's every 2 weeks, that's got a difference over the month. So you're not going to capture that granularity if you do things on a monthly basis. You need to know where you're at week by week, and that will be important at some point. So this I'm throwing out here as an example, but it is weekly is particularly important. But these are the other, and the categories are going to be specific to your business. But this is the kind of that's you don't need to target anything more complex than that in terms of a cash flow projection template. I pulled this from one of our more standard service slides, but it's just another sort of perspective on it. You will find that recording assumptions for the ways that the numbers, to make sure you remember where a number came from is particularly important. So figure out how you're doing that, so you know when you come back to 2 weeks from now, you're like, well, why did I put that number in there? What was it that made me think this was an appropriate number? You want to have a way of saying, oh, that's because this contract said that, or whatever it is. Make sure you have that traceability so you can understand why at any point there's a number in there, so you don't have to A, find out you're wrong, or B, just not be able to forecast it properly going forward. But this is just another perspective on the way and the way of building a cash flow projection side. Just lastly, some advice and tips on it. It needs to be weekly. It will be critical at some point, and weekly granularity applies for payments that you're making to vendors. Maybe you can only push some vendors by 2 weeks, but that will be an important differentiating a factor to include in the cash flow model. Get a first draft out. The first thing you can do is make sure you're working on getting something that is in a workable template with your first set of assumptions and with all the available information you have to hand. Get that done first, because with that, then you can start to improve accuracy. Then you can start to figure out, well, I made an assumption on, what I'm still tied into in a contract for maintenance in some shape or form. Let me now take an action to go and figure out whether that's right or not. And so your action list will come out of that as to what you've got to do to improve the accuracy of it. But get a first draft finalize the template, make sure you understand, make sure you've gone through that thought process of capturing as much as possible. Treat it all as cash basis. Your comparable is going to be the bank activity. Most of you probably only have one bank account. If you've got one or more, in any case, that bank activity is your go-to. That's what you're going to use to compare. And this is where it's important to have figure out some method whereby that bank activity, as the weeks go by, you download it, you categorize it, you say, okay, well, here's what I thought was going to happen, and here's what actually happened. And that comparability, that variance analysis we call it, is very, very important for optimizing and improving the accuracy of the projection. Because when you figure out where you went wrong, then you can make sure that the projection is more accurate and is more likely to be right. And so that figure out that download from the bank statement, from the bank portal, get that bank statement activity downloaded on a weekly basis, prepare that actuals comparison, and then help use that to inform the projection going forward. It's unfortunate. There will always be surprises. There will always be things that you didn't remember, but you've got to work hard to minimize them. And there's not really you don't really get to the point where you think, okay, there's definitely, I can check the box and saying I've caught everything. You don't actually ever catch everything, but you need to work hard to minimize the stuff that will then end up as a surprise. And lastly, share the projections with the team. There's no point in having a cash flow projection that then other people aren't aware of, that they aren't actually taking their steps and working on their priorities, and not aware that you've set a limitation on how much cash needs to be spent on a particular vendor. Make sure that those assumptions and that those plans are shared across as much of the team as necessary. You'll have to manage the exposure to the nervousness that might result from lack of cash. So you've got some way in which you might want to stepwise release information, but certainly make sure that any assumptions you're making on how employees are going to use their vendor relationships, that they're aware of the cash limitations that you've placed on top of them. So it's important to share that projections information. So that's just some takeaways on the cash flow forecasting side. Again, the template should be very simple, make it weekly, etc., etc. Just a few takeaways before we jump into Q&A. Again, I'm really harping on it, but there's the cash flow forecast. That's easy. Just to make a start on a weekly template, just start doing it, because it's going to get your mind thinking about where all the cash is. And that's frankly one of the ways in which people identify where there is cash going out the company, which they never realized or never thought about before. So even just doing that is going to help you go right back to slide 1 of the presentation, find out those places where there's non-essential spend. Keep everybody informed, start those conversations, be in touch with the customers, even if it's just a check-in to start with. Make sure you've got that point of contact, make sure you're having that regular conversation with them. And employees, make sure you've got them updated on a weekly basis, and others, as I've described already. Really, really important, so that surprises are managed, but really also so you can identify opportunities. It's going to give you most flexibility going forward. And then lastly, promises of the last time I mentioned it, there's the webinar later today. For those of you who came to this webinar hoping to hear about the COVID finance initiatives, the information is there. Just attend at 4 p.m. Eastern time today. And I think there's a link that I've already given to Chelsea, but we'll make sure that you guys get access to that and you can join that. It's free, it's public, and it's a great set of people that will go into a lot of detail, and there will be extensive Q&A available in that as well. Okay, I think that's all I had.
Okay, so everybody, if you have questions, go ahead and submit those questions in. And I've put the link for that webinar in the chat many times. So if you can't see the link, just shoot me an email and we'll make sure that you get set up with that. And then just as a reminder, if you need help one-on-one, you are invited to sign up to meet one-on-one with our team. All you need to do is click the link that I put in the chat to sign up for that as well. Okay, here's a question. Is there a particular app or tool that you love to use to put cash flow together?
Great, terrific question. And it's an oversight on my part that I didn't even mention, but yes, Excel or Google Sheets are the platform, basically a spreadsheet. It needs to be nothing more complex than that. You don't need to use any of those modeling platforms that you subscribe to online. You don't need anything more complex than a spreadsheet application. And Excel is the go-to, Google Sheets. If you've got people, well, it's a common thing. You use Google productivity platform if you want multiple people to be involved in it, you want to share the information around. So whichever one makes more sense. It needs to be nothing more than a spreadsheet. That's it.
Okay, does anybody else have questions they want to ask?
We're happy, just to let everybody know, we're happy to do a consultation, have a chat with anybody who wants to follow up after this. More than happy to talk about individual circumstances and give advice and see how else we might be able to help. So not by any means the only time to ask us questions.
Donna, did you have something that you wanted to say?
No, other than we appreciate these tough times, and we appreciate you being with us today. And like Johnny said, we're here to help. We have a lot of resources, so please reach out.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, everybody. It looks like we don't have any other questions. Oh, here comes one. Oh, how can we communicate with M Accounting later? I'll share Donna's email address when I send the follow-up email out to everybody after this event. So you'll be able to email Donna directly.
Yep, and Johnny as well, if you would include Johnny's email as well. Okay?
Yeah, for sure.
Very happy to.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all we have for today. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Everybody have a good afternoon. We will have our very last webinar tomorrow at noon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye now.